The Wii MotionPlus is a peripheral for the Nintendo Wii that adds a gyro sensor to the motion sensing capabilities of the Wii remote. Put simply, that means the device was now able to sense rotation in addition to its basic function of sensing acceleration. The Wii MotionPlus was released in June of 2009, and unlike most other Nintendo peripherals, it did not launch with an accompanying Nintendo game in most regions. The only outlier here being Japan, where it launched alongside Wii Sports Resort. Over here in America, we had to make do with Tiger Woods PGA Tour 10. But the rather barren launch lineup in the West didn't manage to hinder the popularity of the Wii MotionPlus in any significant way, as it has become what could be considered the most successful Nintendo peripheral of all time. It was used in around 50 games across the Wii and Wii U, which, if you've seen any of my other weird peripheral videos, you'll know is pretty much unheard of levels of support for a Nintendo peripheral. Also, just going based on sales of Wii Sports Resort, which came bundled with the Wii MotionPlus, there were at least 33.14 million devices sold and in use around the world, which once again is a lot for a Nintendo peripheral. And in this video, we're going to take a look at how the runaway success that is the Wii MotionPlus was developed, how it was used, and what it's made of. So without further ado, let's just dive right into it. First off, let's talk about how and by who this tiny yet very important peripheral was developed. And as I very often do, I used the Iwata Asks interviews conducted by the late great Nintendo president Iwata Satoru for reference when trying to find out more about the development of the Wii MotionPlus. As luck would have it, there happens to be an entire interview devoted solely to this topic, titled Iwata Asks Wii MotionPlus, where Iwata interviews several key Nintendo employees involved in the development of the Wii MotionPlus. There's Takamoto Junji, who worked in the Integrated Research and Development Division of the Product Development Department, Development Group 3. He was the project leader on the hardware side of the Wii MotionPlus's development. We also have Wakitani Noboru from the same department, who worked on the mechanism design, and Itou Kuniaki, also from Development Group 3, who was in charge of Electrical Circuitry. Lastly, we have Ota Keizo, who worked in the Entertainment Analysis and Development Division's Design Technology Group and was in charge of developing the SDK, or Software Development Kit, for the Wii MotionPlus. Honestly, the fact that we have some concrete names of people who worked on this peripheral, as well as what they worked on, makes me a very happy boy, as that's a luxury we aren't afforded very often. But the luxury doesn't stop there. We also have a veritable smorgasbord of information about the development process of the Wii MotionPlus here as well. Let's start from the beginning and talk about where the idea for this device came from. Well, according to Takamoto, development got properly underway at the very start of 2008. It was the head of my department, Takeda Genyo, who got the ball rolling when he said, "How about connecting the Wii remote to a gyro sensor?" So from this quote, we now know it was none other than the longtime Nintendo hardware designer, Takeda Genyo, who came up with the idea for the Wii MotionPlus. This shouldn't come as any real surprise though, as Takeda has worked on and created numerous different consoles and peripherals for Nintendo over the years. But now that we know who created the Wii MotionPlus, let's find out why it was created in the first place. Once again, quoting Takamoto, "It was because the original Wii remote could only detect movements along straight lines." Iwata then clarifies, saying, "This is to say that the accelerometer in the Wii remote only responded to movements that were along straight lines, such as waving, thrusting, and pulling." Takamoto then replies, "That's right. To put it in technical terms, it detected acceleration along straight lines on the X, Y, and Z axes. So for instance, when you play golf on Wii Sports, it can detect a swing along a straight line, but..." Iwata then finishes the thought, "but it's not able to detect the angle of the club's face." After which, Takamoto continues, saying, "Precisely. This is why it couldn't distinguish between hooked or sliced shots. But when you combine the Wii Remote controller's accelerometer with a gyro sensor, it can detect movement along 6 different axes. This means that it won't only detect movements along straight lines, but also movements like rotation and twist. This makes it possible to reproduce the movements of the player very faithfully, which is why we thought a gyro sensor would offer such huge advantages." So there's our why. The gyro sensor in the Wii MotionPlus allows for a much better representation of the player's movements during gameplay, so implementing one into the Wii remote was basically a no-brainer when it came time to develop a Wii peripheral. But this leads us to yet another very important question about the Wii MotionPlus's development. That is, if it makes the gameplay so much more realistic and fun, why wasn't a gyro sensor baked into the Wii remote from day one? Well, that's something that Takamoto can answer for us as well. He said, "We actually looked into the idea of including a gyro sensor at the very start of the Wii Remote controller's development. But the idea was rejected due to issues of both space and cost, which attaching a gyro sensor would entail." Now, that's fair enough, but as we know now, only about a year after this interview was held, Nintendo would go on to release a new version of the Wii Remote known as the Wii Remote Plus that had Wii MotionPlus's gyro sensor on the board. This would be the standard for most Wii Remotes going forward as well. This sequence of events seems to contradict what Takamoto said in the interview, but my guess would be that since they didn't know if the Wii would be a success or not, they didn't want to spend too much time and money on the Wii Remote. But once the console took off and saw astronomical success, they thought the investment would be worth it, which it clearly was. But anyway, from this point, the interview takes a bit of a turn. We now get a rather long list of various problems that the development teams had to overcome to get the Wii MotionPlus to function. However, if I went through all of these in the level of detail given in the interview, we'd be here all day, so I'm going to try to quickly summarize them each as best I can. First, we have the issue that a typical gyro sensor was not accurate enough to read very fast movements. This was solved by simply increasing the number of degrees per second the Wii MotionPlus can discern. In case you're wondering, that's 1600 degrees per second. However, this led to a different issue where the gyro sensor was too accurate to read slow movements. This was addressed by adding a separate mode to the gyro sensor, where it essentially truncates some of its data to better represent slow movements. We then have the issue of temperature drift, which basically means that due to changes in temperature and humidity, the gyro sensor would think it's moving even though it's really not. This was solved with software that simply tells the gyro sensor, "No, you're not moving." Next, the issue of the Wii MotionPlus getting out of sync due to the wireless nature of the device was brought up. This was solved by using the accelerometer in some way that isn't elaborated on, probably because it was very technically complicated. After this came a problem where the connector to the Wii Remote and the hooks that held the Wii MotionPlus in place would break during harsh movement. This was fixed by making the connector a bit more free-moving and changing the hooks to a sturdier type of plastic. The last and most interesting problem, in my opinion, was that the casing around the gyro sensor would absorb moisture, which would mess with its accuracy. One way to fix this is to have the casing absorb moisture from the get-go, so it's stable and retains its accuracy, but accomplishing this proved difficult. The team tried stuff like boiling the circuit board, which doesn't sound like a super great idea to me. They even bought a pressure cooker with company money to test if that would work, but it obviously was not practical. In the end, they just put the circuit boards in a room with a humidifier and a heater for 48 hours until they were stable. It seems to me like that probably should have been the first approach to the problem, but who am I to question Nintendo? And with that, we've pretty much gone through the entire interview. Obviously, the original goes into more detail than I could, so I'll leave a link in the description for anyone interested. However, one thing that you won't find in the Iwata Asks interview is the name iLive. According to Wikipedia, they're a tech company that helped Nintendo with the software side of the Wii MotionPlus's development. As far as I can gather from the little information available about this company and their involvement here, they seem to have developed some of the motion tracking algorithms for the Wii MotionPlus, which is a pretty important role to play. I can't be sure to what degree they contributed to the Wii MotionPlus, but I figured I'd just mention them here to make you guys aware that this, like many other Nintendo peripheral development processes, wasn't a one-company job. But now let's move on to how the Wii MotionPlus was actually used and functioned during gameplay. So, like I said before, since the Wii MotionPlus was such an important peripheral, it saw what I would consider to be unheard of levels of support for a single Nintendo accessory, which means that I obviously won't be able to go through exactly how the Wii MotionPlus was used in every game that supports it, like I try to do for other videos. However, since the Wii MotionPlus is such a simplistic device in what it accomplishes, I think looking at a few major games that support the peripheral should be sufficient in giving us an understanding of how it was used. I've picked what I believe to be the two most important Nintendo games that support the Wii MotionPlus, Wii Sports Resort, and The Legend of Zelda Skyward Sword, and we're going to take a look at how each game made use of this peripheral. First, Wii Sports Resort, and as I'm sure most of you are already aware, Wii Sports Resort is a compilation of many individual minigame type sports games where the Wii MotionPlus is used to varying degrees depending on the game. So once again, for the sake of time, let's just talk about the two sports games that, in my opinion, make the best use of the Wii MotionPlus, Swordplay and Table Tennis. Swordplay is a collection of 3 games that all do a rather good job showing the benefits that the Wii MotionPlus brings to the table. That's probably why it was so heavily used in marketing for Wii Sports Resort and the Wii MotionPlus peripheral. The 3 games in question here are Duel, where you sword fight against another player or CPU, Speed Slice, where you have to quickly and accurately slice a variety of objects, and Showdown Mode, where you battle through a large number of sword-wielding enemies. The reason I said this mode is a very good representation of the Wii MotionPlus's capabilities is because, as you can see, the player has full control over their sword. This is something that is only possible on the Wii with the combination of the Wiimote and the Wii MotionPlus. But free control of the sword isn't the only thing Swordplay has going for it. The way the individual games are designed also gives us some insight into ways the Wii MotionPlus could be used in other games. For example, in every mode of Swordplay, the player has to swing their sword in a specific direction to either hit their opponent through their guard or slice an object. This is a perfect example of how a game could be made with the Wii MotionPlus to require specific angles of motion in certain scenarios. Once again, this type of gameplay is only possible thanks to the gyro sensor. Next, let's talk about table tennis. And much like Swordplay, the big advantage the Wii MotionPlus brings to the table here, no pun intended, is the ability to freely control your paddle as you move your hand. However, that isn't the only new gameplay possibility brought about by the Wii MotionPlus. The ability by the player to spin and curve their shots at will is another example of how the Wii MotionPlus could be used to create new styles of gameplay. To make this happen, the player simply has to twist their wrist when hitting the ball, just as they would in real table tennis. Compare this to the original tennis game in Wii Sports, and it's like night and day. In the original, you could only hit either forehand or backhand, and as far as I'm aware, you had no control over the spin or angle of the shot. Just playing these 2 mini-games in succession should be enough to show you how much of a difference the Wii MotionPlus can make to the overall gameplay experience. But at the end of the day, Wii Sports Resort is more of a fun minigame showcase than a full-fledged Nintendo blockbuster, so let's take a look at Skyward Sword now to get an idea for how Nintendo used this technology in one of their mainline games. And like you'd probably expect, in Skyward Sword you have free control of your sword thanks to the Wii MotionPlus. And Nintendo took great advantage of this fact by incorporating many enemies and puzzles that require the precise control of your sword. This has become somewhat of a divisive topic in the Zelda community over the years. Some people enjoy the motion-based gameplay, and some people absolutely despise it. I'm personally one of the former, but no matter how you feel about it now, you can't deny that this is a really cool use of technology to make a game more immersive and interesting. But getting back on track here, let's just talk about one more aspect of Skyward Sword that illustrates the potential of the Wii MotionPlus, the Beetle. The Beetle item is, as the name suggests, a remote control beetle that responds to the way you tilt the Wii remote when moving. Tilt left to go left and right to go right. It's very simple. However, this does once again give us an idea of how Nintendo and other game companies could use the Wii MotionPlus to make games more interesting. I can think of a bunch of games and genres off the top of my head that could benefit from gyro sensor tilting technology like we see with the Beetle in Skyward Sword, but as we know, most of these possibilities never came to be. In my opinion, it's sad that Nintendo or some other game company never really tried to improve this type of gameplay experience with a successor or spiritual successor to Skyward Sword. There is potential for some really fun games with this technology, but I guess that isn't the direction that Nintendo or the current gaming community wanted to go. But now let's change gears and talk about the internals of the Wii MotionPlus. At least that's what I'd like to do, but the guy I ordered a Wii MotionPlus from on eBay sent me what appears to be a reproduction. So for this part of the video, I'm just going to be talking over a video of me taking apart the fake Wii MotionPlus. I'm going to be saying stuff about the original, so just take what I'm doing in the background as loose context. A real Wii MotionPlus is held together with 2 tri-point screws found on the underside of the device. You'll need a specialized screwdriver to remove these. Then once you get to the inside, you'll see the board is held in place using 2 clip-like pieces of plastic. Remove these and then pull the internals out of the casing to get a full view of what's going on here. The main board essentially sits between the 2 sides of an expansion port as a go-between, while also carrying out its main gyroscopic functionality. The main chip that's used on a genuine Wii MotionPlus should be an InvenSense IDG600 on early models, and an InvenSense IDG650 on later models. These are both gyro sensors. Now, I can't show a real chip on a real Wii MotionPlus, but I do happen to have a Wii Remote Plus with a very similar chip on board. In this case, that's an InvenSense ITG3280. I have no idea what the differences are between the chips, but I'm assuming this is a gyro sensor built specifically for use in Wii Remote Pluses. But other than the gyro sensor, we should probably have an analog to digital converter to convert the analog signals from the gyro sensor to usable data, as well as a microcontroller to make everything happen. However, that's obviously all speculation on my part because I have a fake device. But other than the electrical components here, we also have the hooks that are used to grab into the back of the Wii Remote. These should be relatively similar even with a fake unit like I have. The hooks are extended to fit into the holes by pressing the two gray buttons on the sides of the Wii MotionPlus down. A thin piece of metal then acts as a spring to keep the hooks in place until you try to release the device. We also have the locking mechanism that simply puts two thin pieces of plastic in the way of the levers when pushed forward. This makes the connection to the Wii Remote more secure during play. And that's pretty much all there is to know about this device. The Wii MotionPlus is a very useful and impactful peripheral that saw very high levels of support for a Nintendo accessory. This can be chalked up to its simplicity in just being a gyro sensor for the Wii Remote, while also having a huge effect on gameplay. However, even though the Wii MotionPlus was very simplistic in its design, that doesn't mean it didn't have more than its fair share of problems during development. I mean, it's the only peripheral I've ever heard of that required the use of a pressure cooker by the developers. But all jokes aside, I honestly believe the Wii MotionPlus is a great example of how to make a peripheral mainstream. Sure, things like the DK bongos and the Ring-Con are a lot of fun, and I adore them very much, but they never really had a chance at being used in a major Nintendo game. The Wii MotionPlus, on the other hand, was so basic and yet so important in its design that it became a staple of many Wii games that came after it. It even spanned two consoles, which is basically impossible for any other peripheral out there. Sure, it could have just been baked into the Wii Remote from day one, but we all know that wouldn't be weird enough for Nintendo. And I wouldn't have been able to purchase a fake one, and that really would have been the biggest shame of all, now wouldn't it? But anyway, thanks so much for taking the time out of your day to listen to me ramble on about a 2-inch brick of plastic that sticks into the bottom of the Wii Remote. It really means a lot to me. If you did happen to enjoy today's video, consider giving it a like. It's always greatly appreciated and helps me out a ton. And if you want to see more content like this in the future, consider subscribing as well. Thanks again for watching, everybody, and I'll see you in the next one. Hack out. Let this be a lesson to you kids. Never buy anything off eBay where you can't see the manufacturer's markings. Don't turn out like me, kids. Don't turn out like me.